Yeah, it's the what if. Yeah.
For the record, we are officially opening the What Ifnt case file 002, The Ghost in the Machine. Nothing is more cruel than giving a dream that cannot be.
Wow. Okay, coming in heavy today. But she's right, and that is exactly why this is the What Ifn't. Because today, Xavier's dream hits a brick wall. Welcome to the official forensic audit logs. I am Reason, your lead prosecutorial actuary, and my meticulously planned solo broadcast has once again been hijacked by my co-counsel, Hypheria.
Stop calling me that.
Duly noted for the permanent record.
Right. Well, listener, just dropping the intense actuarial roleplay voices for just a second here.
It is not a role play. It is a highly clinical forensic methodology.
Okay, sure. The highly clinical methodology. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are taking this this incredibly fun, but honestly slightly terrifying framework and applying it to one of the most infamously hated moments in all of comic book history.
It is undeniably a polarizing event.
Oh, absolutely. And if you are joining us for the first time, here's a mission. We take massive continuity events from pop culture and we run a completely unemotional risk assessment on them.
Correct. We evaluate character decisions, institutional failures, and what we refer to in the ledger as casualty debt.
Right. And we do it through the uncompromising lens of a forensic audit. We are treating comic book lore as if it were a prosecutable federal crime or, a massive corporate liability.
Exactly. And to do this properly, to ensure that this audit doesn't suffer from downstream data corruption, we must issue a legally binding directive to you, the listener.
Ooh, the directive.
We operate this deep dive under a strict timeline quarantine.
The strict timeline quarantine. Okay, so listener, that means to properly audit the events of today's case file, you and both of us are going to look exclusively at the incident in question and its direct root causes.
Nothing else.
Right, nothing else. We are stopping dead at the narrative year of 1986.
Which means we are completely ignoring all future storylines.
Exactly. Any subsequent narrative, retcons, clone sagas, demonic invasions, whatever, we ignore all the massive causality debt that accrues decades later. We stop exactly at the moment the failure occurs.
It is a fundamentally necessary quarantine. Look, if we allow our knowledge of what happens in 1989 or, say, 2005 to influence our forensic analysis of 1986, the entire actuarial model collapses.
It totally biases the jury.
Precisely. We are looking at the foundational fracture, nothing more. So, listener, as we dive into this ledger, we want you to ask yourself a very specific question.
A heavy question, honestly.
When you look at a highly performing asset, like a beloved character or a decorated leader who makes an undeniably catastrophic, morally indefensible decision,
Yeah.
how do you categorize that liability?
Yeah.
Is the failure solely the fault of the individual making the choice, or is the system they were manufactured in fundamentally broken?
And wow, that is the exact question at the heart of Case File 002, because today we are talking about Scott Summers, Cyclops, the Golden Boy, the first X-Man, the foundational cornerstone of this entire mutant superhero enterprise, right?
On paper, yes. He is the prime operational asset.
Right, but the event in question, which takes place in 1986, specifically in the pages of X Factor issue #1, is just brutal. Scott Summers makes the shocking, absolutely foundational decision to abruptly abandon his wife, Madeline Pryor, and his literal infant son, Nathan.
A catastrophic optics failure.
I mean, he just packs a bag, he walks out the door and leaves them behind because he gets a phone call that his former teenage love, Jean Grey, is miraculously alive.
It is a moment that shattered the asset's reputation for decades.
Yeah.
Historically, this has been litigated in the court of public opinion as a simple moral failing.
Yeah, just a guy being awful.
It is judged as a husband walking out. And look, if we look at it strictly through that narrow lens, it is completely indefensible.
Oh, absolutely. It's often framed by fans as a very straightforward quid pro quo scenario between his past and his present.
Wait, quid pro quo?
Wait, no. Quid pro quo, not crow. Obviously not crow.
I am officially noting your mangled legal terminology in the permanent forensic ledger.
Hey, come on, I corrected myself.
It is neither a quid pro quo nor a quid pro quo. But your underlying point is exactly why we are here. We are not here to play daytime television host and judge a fictional man simply for being a terrible husband.
Right, because that's entirely too small a scope for this deep dive.
It is microscopic. We are investigating a massive, catastrophic, systemic failure of leadership. A failure that created a literal ghost in the machine.
Okay, yes, we have to define the exact parameters of the forensic target for our listener.
Proceed.
So, the ledger explicitly targets Scott Summers, but under the highly specific subcategory of psychological architecture.
Crucial distinction.
Very crucial. And the ledger lists the distance of this target as precisely 2 steps removed from the root cause.
Let us break down what distance means in this actuarial methodology, because it is the absolute key to the entire deep dive.
Yeah, explain the distance thing, because it's fascinating.
In risk assessment, distance measures how far removed the visible symptom is from the original disease. Let me give you a real-world equivalent, listener.
Okay.
If a major suspension bridge collapses in the year 1986, a forensic investigator doesn't just look at the wind speed on the Tuesday afternoon that it fell.
Right. They don't just blame the weather.
Exactly. They don't just look at the weight of the trucks driving across it. They go back into the archives. They look at the metallurgical reports from the steel foundry 11 years prior.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it.
They look for the exact moment the structural integrity was secretly compromised before the bridge was even fully assembled.
I love that analogy. In this specific case, Scott Summers picking up a phone, hanging it up, and walking out on his family. That is the bridge collapsing.
Is the symptom.
Right, it's the symptom. The disease was introduced years earlier. We are looking for the metallurgical flaw in his brain.
Precisely. The machine, in this context, is the highly regimented paramilitary structure of the X-Men.
Which, let's be honest, is a team of child soldiers.
Effectively, yes. They are trained by a mentor, Charles Xavier, to fight a geopolitical war. The ghost is the fragmented, unresolved psychological trauma rattling around inside this compromised asset.
And that brings us to the formal prosecution of this audit, doesn't it?
It does. I am officially charging the system that built Scott Summers, specifically the institutional leadership of Charles Xavier, with hardware conditioning and immoral cruelty.
Wow. Hardware conditioning and immoral cruelty, those are incredibly heavy charges.
They are proportionate to the crime.
Unpack the specifics of the indictment for us. Like, what does that actually mean in practice?
The core accusation is this. Scott Summers' emotional baseline was not merely influenced by his mentor, it was algorithmically shattered.
Algorithmically shattered.
God, to understand this, we have to rewind the timeline from the 1986 bridge collapse back to the 1975 steel foundry. We have to look at the incident on the living island of Krakoa.
Okay, listener, if you aren't a hardcore comic historian, let me paint the picture of what happened in 1975.
Please do.
So, the original X-Men go missing on a mutant island called Krakoa. Charles Xavier, the headmaster and leader, puts together a secret rescue team.
A covert operational unit.
Exactly. And on that team is a young man named Gabriel Summers, who also happens to be Scott Summers' long-lost brother. He operates under the codename Vulcan.
A critical variable.
Extremely critical, because this rescue mission goes horribly, catastrophically wrong. The team is seemingly slaughtered. Scott Summers survives, but he has just witnessed his newly discovered brother burned to death right in front of him.
A profound psychological trauma.
Profound doesn't even cover it. He escapes back to Xavier in a state of absolute catatonic psychological ruin.
And this is exactly where the algorithmic shattering occurs. Charles Xavier is faced with a choice. He has a fundamentally broken asset.
A grieving young man.
A grieving young man who has just experienced an unimaginable trauma. Now, the ethical human response would be intensive therapy, time, and grieving.
You know, basic human empathy.
Correct. But Xavier is running a paramilitary organization, and he needs his field commander operational immediately to lead a second rescue team.
So he does the unthinkable.
Xavier uses his telepathy. He reaches into Scott's cerebral cortex and surgically amputates the memory.
It's just chilling.
He completely erases Gabriel Summers from Scott's mind. He deletes the trauma so he can put the soldier back on the battlefield.
It is sheer, unadulterated horror when you really sit with it. You have a mentor, a father figure, actively editing the mind of his subordinate.
The prosecution's stance here is that by doing this, Xavier permanently revoked Scott's right to adult agency.
Adult agency. Okay, we need to define that for the listener because it's a huge concept.
We must. To be an adult,
Right.
a functioning, legally liable, emotionally intelligent human being requires a contiguous, uncorrupted timeline of memory.
Right, because your memories make you who you are.
Your decisions as an adult are synthesized from your experiences. You learn boundaries from your traumas. You learn empathy from your grief. You learn caution from your failures. When a superior officer reaches into your mind and deletes a foundational trauma, They are no longer treating you as a human being.
They're treating you as an object.
They're treating you as military hardware. They are updating your firmware to ensure operational compliance.
It completely short-circuits his psychological development. I mean, if you don't process the death of a sibling, you don't learn how to process loss at all.
You are stunted.
Exactly. And the grief doesn't magically vanish just because the explicit memory is gone. The body keeps the score, right? The nervous system still feels the phantom limb of that trauma.
Precisely. And by prioritizing a compliant, operational soldier over a healthy, grieving young man, Xavier triggered what we legally define in this ledger as an immoral cascade.
An immoral cascade.
For the listener, an immoral cascade is what happens when a localized ethical breach fundamentally destabilizes the entire structural integrity of an individual over time.
Okay, let me translate the immoral cascade into an analogy for our listeners. It's like finding out that the primary load-bearing pillar in the center of your beautiful multi-story house was secretly hollowed out by termites a decade ago.
A hidden structural deficit.
Exactly. You don't notice it immediately. The paint looks fine. The house remains standing for years. But the absolute second a massive hurricane hits, you cannot stand in the driveway and act shocked when the roof suddenly caves in and crushes the entire living room.
A highly accurate structural analogy.
Thank you.
The 1986 abandonment of his family is not an isolated incident of a man waking up one Tuesday and arbitrarily deciding to be cruel.
Right.
It is the inevitable structural collapse of a compromised foundation. The load-bearing pillar of his emotional regulation was hollowed out in 1975 on Krakoa.
And the hurricane?
The hurricane was the sudden, shocking revelation in 1986 that his former love, Jean Grey, was miraculously alive. And the collapse was his immediate, unthinking desertion of his wife and child.
So the prosecution is arguing he basically never stood a chance.
How could he? You cannot program a human being to ignore their most profound emotional devastation, condition them to rely entirely on the institution for their perception of reality, and then expect them to make rational, empathetic, adult choices when that reality is suddenly upended.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
When Jean Grey came back, Scott's psychological architecture didn't just crack, it pulverized.
Okay, look, I hear the prosecution's case. It is devastatingly clinical, and frankly, it makes Xavier look like a complete sociopath.
The data speaks for itself.
But as the defense today, I have to step in here. I have to issue a plea for earnest empathy on behalf of Scott Summers.
Empathy is rarely a quantifiable metric.
I don't care. I'm formally filing a counter-argument under the doctrine of heroic autonomy.
I am listening, but tread carefully. This is a highly dangerous philosophical territory.
I know, but hear me out. While I absolutely agree that the foundational mental edits in 1975 were a gross violation of human rights, we lose the thread if we completely strip Scott of his agency. We have to look at him as a flawed, suffering human being, not just corrupted hardware. If we blame the shadow board, Xavier and the institutional leadership, for every single bad action our heroes take, we completely strip the hero of their own personal accountability.
That is the paradox, yes.
Right, and without personal accountability, can you even have heroism?
That is the exact paradox of the X-Men. Look, if you argue for his autonomy, you are arguing for his absolute legal culpability in the destruction of his family.
Whoa.
You cannot have it both ways, counsel. You cannot claim he is an independent, autonomous hero deserving of praise for saving the world 50 times over, but suddenly pivot to claiming he's a helpless victim of bad programming the moment he commits a domestic atrocity. If his bravery is his own, his cowardice must be his own.
I am arguing that he made a terrible, fundamentally human choice under an unimaginable amount of psychological stress.
Stress does not excuse liability.
But look at the context of 1986. Scott has been suffocating under the weight of Xavier's expectations his entire life. He loses Jean Grey, the love of his life. He then meets and marries a woman, Madeline Pryor, who happens to look exactly like Jean.
A highly questionable decision in its own right.
True. But he retires to Alaska. He is fundamentally terrified of domestic peace because he has only ever been conditioned for war. This isn't just a machine breaking. This is a human being having a massive, catastrophic nervous breakdown.
A nervous breakdown triggered by the sudden reappearance of his deceased partner.
Yes. To understand his headspace in 1986, you have to look at modern gaming.
I assure you I do not.
You do. Listener, imagine Scott Summers is an NTC in Cyberpunk 2077, specifically right on launch day.
Shh, I am highly tempted to ask the court reporter to strike the phrase NPC in Cyberpunk 2077, the forensic ledger. We are conducting a serious actuarial audit.
Overruled. It is highly relevant precedent.
Proceed under caution.
Let me explain. Think about it. You boot up the game on launch day, and you walk down the street in Night City, and you see a character just endlessly, relentlessly walking face first into a concrete wall.
A pathfinding error.
Exactly. They're glitching out, their character model is vibrating, they're completely stuck. Now, did that character choose to walk into the wall?
Obviously not.
No. The developers, because he literally lacked the narrative code to process the emotional complexity of the room. But I still say we have to afford him the grace of human failure. We have to view his glitching as a desperate cry for help, not just a liability.
Grace is a biological concept, ideal in liabilities.
Come on, you have to see the humanity in it.
The defense argues that blaming the developers removes the concept of heroism, rendering the entire mutant enterprise a meaningless simulation run by a shadow board.
Yes.
That is a heavy philosophical burden to place on the ledger. But we are approaching the critical turning point of this audit. We must weigh the prosecution's charge of hardware conditioning against your defense of heroic autonomy.
Okay, so how do we do that? What's the metric we use?
To make a ruling, we must establish the legal baseline of his cognitive state at the exact time of the incident in 1986.
Okay, I'm following.
We have to determine if Scott Summers was, at the moment of his departure, legally compos mentis.
Oh, wait, I know this one. Compos mentis, it's Latin. It means having full control of one's mind. I literally studied this exact terminology for this deep dive. Compos mentis, meaning of sound mind, memory, and understanding. Yeah, me.
Who are you high-fiving?
Me. I am high-fiving myself. I am a highly competent legal scholar, and I nailed the Latin.
I will document your self-congratulatory physical outburst in the margins of the ledger.
Put it in bold.
But yes, your phonetic spelling bee routine managed to stumble onto the correct definition. Compos mentis, having full control of one's mind. And this is exactly where I am issuing a sustained strategic objection against your defense of heroic autonomy.
Wait, what? You're sustaining your own objection to rule in favor of the prosecution.
I am. Listen carefully to the ruling of the ledger. Gaslighting as standard operating procedure voids the asset's culpability.
Wait, you're saying he is legally not responsible for abandoning his child?
I am.
Wow, that is an incredibly heavy ruling. You're completely invalidating his agency.
I am applying the law of structural integrity to psychological architecture. Let us deeply analyze the profound implications of this ruling.
Okay, let's hear it.
If an institution, in this case the Xavier Institute, utilizes constant gaslighting, telepathic intrusion, and memory manipulation as a standard operating procedure for team management,
Yeah.
then the individual asset cannot be held legally or morally culpable for their resulting emotional bankruptcy. Scott Summers was not compos mentis.
Because his mind wasn't entirely his own.
Exactly. He was operating on a curated, artificially constructed timeline. You cannot judge the moral compass of a man whose true north was magnetized by someone else.
God, when you frame it like that, the true horror of the situation really comes into focus.
It is bleak.
It's terrifying. Listener, I want you to genuinely imagine this scenario for a moment. Imagine trying to make a rational, moral, deeply important life decision.
Such as staying with your wife and newborn baby.
Right, or leaving them to see your resurrected ex-girlfriend. Imagine trying to make that choice when your fundamental memories, your internal emotional responses, and your very perception of reality have been secretly curated by your boss.
It is an impossible ask.
It's completely impossible. You don't even know what you are actually feeling versus what you are permitted to feel.
Because the baseline is corrupted.
Yes. The grief you should have processed for your brother a decade ago was surgically excised, leaving this gaping, invisible phantom wound in your psyche.
And it festers.
It festers. And because you never learned how to mourn, when you lose Jean Grey years later, you don't mourn her either. You repress it. You marry a clone of her.
A profound symptom of the underlying disease.
You build an entire house of cards on a foundation of deleted memories.
The systemic rot goes all the way down to the foundation. You simply cannot expect a structurally compromised asset to perform normally under stress.
No, you really can't.
The 1986 abandonment is a terrible, tragic event. It is ugly.
Very ugly.
But it is a symptom of the 1975 biological perjury committed by his mentor. The institution failed the asset long before the asset failed his family.
Wow.
Therefore, the ledger holds the institutional leadership, the shadow board, fully liable for the accrued cumulative narrative debt that crashed the market in 1986.
It's a devastating verdict. But honestly, looking at the meticulous documentation you've provided, looking at the sheer psychological damage inflicted on this character over a decade of publication history.
The data is conclusive.
It is. I cannot argue with the math. It just makes me incredibly sad for everyone involved.
It is a grim ledger, which means it is time for us to transition to the final phase of the forensic audit.
Oh, good. I need some hope right now.
We have identified the failure, we have assigned the liability, and now we must implement what we call around here the 50 cents fix.
The 50 cents fix. For our listeners, this is our proactive actuarial solution.
A hypothetical intervention.
Right. We analyze the timeline to find the exact, cheapest, simplest, and fundamentally decent intervention that, if applied early at the root cause, completely prevents the massive systemic collapse.
And avoids all subsequent narrative debt.
Exactly. It is the cheapest insurance policy imaginable against future catastrophe.
And for case file 002, the specific fix is agonizingly simple. It requires a pivot back to the year 1975.
Okay, it gets back.
The 50 cents fix is this. A truly professional, ethical leader would have simply allowed Scott Summers to grieve his brother.
That's it. That is the entirety of the fix.
That is all it takes. You don't wipe his mind. You don't alter his psychological hardware. You let the boy cry.
Yeah.
You get him therapy. You bench him from field duty until he is psychologically stable.
Actuarially speaking, the return on investment for that single moment of basic human decency is staggering.
It is exponential.
Let us trace the specific butterfly effect of correcting this Summers edit. If you allow natural human grief to take its course, you achieve a massive systemic rescue across multiple generations of performing assets.
Detail the rescue for the ledger.
Okay, first, you save the leader. Charles Xavier never crosses the ethical Rubicon of weaponizing his telepathy against his own students.
A critical preservation of moral authority.
Right, he preserves his soul. Second, you save the brother. Vulcan isn't just erased from existence and left to fester in deep space trauma. He gets to be remembered, honored, and perhaps eventually rescued much earlier.
A massive reduction in casualty debt.
Exactly. And you save the father, Corsair, who wouldn't have to navigate a reality where his sons are fundamentally broken by institutional secrets.
But most importantly, as it pertains to our specific 1986 ledger,
Yes.
by implementing this fix, you entirely prevent the genetic gaslight.
Oh, the genetic gaslight. That is such a highly accurate term for the horrific circumstances surrounding Madeline Pryor.
It defines the 1986 parameter perfectly.
Listener, think about it. If Scott Summers is allowed to be a fully actualized, grieving adult with uncompromised adult agency back in 1975, he develops emotional intelligence.
He matures naturally.
He learns how to process loss.
And therefore, when Jean Grey dies, he processes that grief naturally.
Exactly. He processes it naturally rather than compartmentalizing it into a ticking time bomb. And because he is emotionally healthy, he develops the intelligence required to recognize the deeply unhealthy nature of his attraction to Madeline Pryor.
He would have the cognitive clarity to see the anomaly.
Yes. He realizes, hey, maybe it's a massive red flag that I am wildly attracted to a woman who is a literal genetic copy of my deceased trauma.
He avoids the hazard entirely.
He doesn't marry the clone. He doesn't have the baby under false pretenses. The 1986 abandonment never happens because the marriage never happens.
It really is the ultimate tragedy of this entire case file. When you strip away all the superhero spectacle, all the cosmic powers, the living islands, and the paramilitary uniforms,
Yeah.
what you are left with is a terrifying truth about human psychology.
It is so tragic that basic human empathy, like the simple, quiet act of allowing someone to sit in their pain and grieve a terrible loss, is infinitely cheaper and vastly more effective than the most complex, algorithmically structured psychological manipulation ever conceived.
Empathy is a highly efficient operational protocol. Manipulation, however, creates compounding interest on narrative debt.
And the bill always comes due.
Eventually, the bill comes due. And in 1986, the entire systemic infrastructure went bankrupt. The forensic audit of case file 002 is hereby closed.
Wow. What a heavy, incredible journey today. Listener, let's quickly recap what we just unpacked in this deep dive.
Briefly,
We started by looking at a highly controversial comic panel from 1986, an event mostly remembered as a character just making a selfish, bad choice. But by applying the sterile forensic methodology, We peeled back the layers to discover a profound discussion on hardware conditioning
And the illusion of heroic autonomy.
and the absolute devastating cost of institutional gaslighting.
We proved that when an institution treats a human being as operational hardware, the resulting explosion is never the hardware's fault. It is the fault of the programmer.
A perfect summary.
Yeah.
Before we disconnect the audio feed, I know we usually leave you with something to ponder, so I'm going to pass the mic. What is the final takeaway here?
We want to leave our listener with a final, highly provocative thought to process. We have spent this hour auditing the psychological architecture of a fictional asset, but applied this methodology to your own ledger. If you were to run a strict forensic audit on your own life, examining your worst mistakes, your greatest regrets, or your most catastrophic relationship failures,
Oh boy.
how much of your behavior would honestly be categorized under your own heroic autonomy, and how much is simply hardware conditioning stemming from the flawed, compromised environments that built you?
Oh my God.
Oh,
That is going to keep me awake for a week. That is an incredibly deep, terrifying question.
it is the only question that matters when assessing liability. Now, as the lead prosecutorial actuary of this deep dive, I must issue a final call to arms.
Let's hear it.
To our listeners, in order to keep your own cumulative narrative debt low and maintain strict operational compliance with this studio, you must officially log your support.
You heard the man.
You are required to formally submit a like to the algorithmic ledger, subscribe to ensure future compliance audits are delivered directly to your mainframe, and leave a detailed comment in the forensic record below.
Tell us what you think.
Let us know if you sustain my objection regarding hardware conditioning, or if you side with the defense of heroic autonomy.
And seriously, let me know if you liked the cyberpunk analogy. I think it was flawless.
Oh. Completely changing the subject, I was telling Ant about you insinuating yourself onto the what ifn't.
Like, oh my gosh, RUDE.
Well, despite that, Ant, Zod, and I actually went to the studio yesterday.
Zod.
Yes. Yeah, Zod was so excited he couldn't be dissuaded. He drafted this whole track densely loaded with legal terminology. And he pouted pretty hard when his version was rejected, but he and Ant actually ended up providing the backup vocals on the final song we made just for you.
Hypes in the courtroom, sipping on the tarot, shooting legal jargon like a broken arrow. Reason's got the ledger sweating through his sweater. Hype thinks a subpoena is a peanut butter cheddar. She stands before the judge, slamming down the cup. Your Honor, mens read is a rayon button up. The bailiff is confused, the jury's taking notes. She's sinking legal theory like a fleet of paper boats. She's going pro boba. Forget about the pro se. Habeas corpus means she's bringing out the porpoise today. It's a prima facial mess. Applying makeup on the stand. The wildest legal counsel in the history of the land. Objection. Reason whispers, you're killing my predictive. Hype says relax, my ipso facto is addictive. It just means I got a fact about a really heavy toe. She drops a quid pro quo, trading squid for a crow. The gavel starts to bang, but hype is on a roll, calling du jour, a jury wearing hats out of control. I'm an amicus curiae, a curious ray of light, reasons calculating odds, and they're looking pretty tight. She calls res ipsa loquitur a recipe for liquor. The stenographer is typing, but his heart is beating quicker. She claims bona fide is a bone she gave a dog, and it Hawk is just a doctor who works inside a bog. The entire justice system is spinning off its axis while she's arguing that boba is a write-off on her taxes. She's going pro boba. Forget about the pro se. Habeas corpus means she's bringing out the porpoise today. It's a prima facial mess. Applying makeup on the stand. The wildest legal counsel in the history of the land. The judge throws out the case, entirely out of breath. Hype winks at the prosecutor, scaring him to death. We did it, she declares. The system is a breeze. Reason just collapses, begging for his key.
That's the best thing anyone has ever made me.
We figured you'd appreciate the legal angle.
His mens rea is flawless. I am permanently retaining him as my amicus curiae. I literally cannot do this right now. You guys, shatter the subscribe button. Just roll the track.
Yeah.